Most people remember Robin Hood. Men in Tights is a movie that made them laugh until something hurt. The songs got stuck in their heads for weeks. The one-liners became part of their vocabulary. The sight of Cary Elwes declaring, with complete sincerity, that unlike some other Robin Hoods, he could speak with an English accent, landed like a perfectly thrown dart, a target the whole audience had been waiting for someone to hit. But what almost nobody talks about, even among the most devoted fans, is how much genuine craft, chaos, legal drama, and sheer human stubbornness went into making that movie exist at all. Behind every cheap gag was a decision someone fought for. Behind every throwaway visual was a prop department that spent weeks engineering it. And behind the whole production was a director who had been circling this exact story for nearly 20 years before he finally got to tell it his way. It starts, as so many unexpected things do, not in a boardroom or a writer's room, but in a dentist chair in Beverly Hills. A man named Evan Chandler, a dentist by profession, had been listening to his 11-year-old son Jordy talk about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, the Kevin Costner blockbuster that had dominated the summer of 1991. The boy's conclusion was simple and, in retrospect, prophetic. The movie was practically begging to be made fun of. Evan Chandler filed that observation away, and his opportunity arrived sooner than expected during a routine appointment with screenwriter J. David Shapiro. Between checkups, Chandler pitched the idea. Shapiro loved it immediately. The two formed one of the most unlikely writing partnerships in Hollywood history, a dentist and a screenwriter, and together they developed a full screenplay built around turning the melodrama of the Costner version into outright absurdity. That script eventually landed in front of Mel Brooks, who purchased it for a reported $500,000. Brooks rewrote it heavily to fit his comedic voice, but the foundation that Shapiro and Chandler had built remained intact beneath everything. The whole project existed because an 11-year-old boy thought a blockbuster had taken itself too seriously, and his father happened to have the right patient at the right moment. Of course, getting a screenplay sold is one thing. Getting your name on it is another fight entirely. Behind the laughs, a serious arbitration battle unfolded over who deserved credit for writing the film. Mel Brooks argued that he and Shapiro deserved full screenplay credit, while Chandler should receive only a story credit for originating the concept. The Writers Guild arbitration process is standard industry procedure, but it is never comfortable. Writers submit drafts, revisions, and notes, and a panel of fellow writers determines whose contribution was substantial enough to earn official recognition. The final credits ended up as a three-way split, with screenplay credited to Brooks, Shapiro, and Chandler, and story credit going to Shapiro and Chandler. Young Jordy, whose casual remark had sparked the entire chain of events, was considered for a mention but ultimately went unrecognized on screen. Viewers watching the opening titles had no idea any of this happened. The names scrolled past cleanly, giving no hint of the legal back and forth that shaped them. What those viewers also didn't know was that Mel Brooks had already tried to crack the Robin Hood legend once before, nearly 2 decades earlier. In 1975, he co-created a fast-paced sitcom for ABC called When Things Were Rotten, which turned the heroic outlaw story into a slapstick free-for-all. It starred Dick Gautier as a bumbling Robin Hood and featured Dick Van Patten as Friar Tuck, and was packed with anachronistic gags and the same irreverent energy Brooks had brought to Blazing Saddles a year before. Critics generally liked it. Audiences did not find it. Competing against powerhouse programming like Little House on the Prairie, the show lasted just 13 episodes before being canceled, with its mid-season replacement, The Bionic Woman, going on to become a hit. Despite the cancellation, the experience proved that Brooks's fascination with the Robin Hood myth was not a passing interest. When the 1993 film came together, he recycled several gags from the old series, including the famous reversed arrow archery trick, and brought Dick Van Patten back to production, though not in the same role. Van Patten had hoped to reprise Friar Tuck, but Brooks had already transformed that character into Rabbi Tuckman and cast himself in the part. The movie wasn't just a response to Prince of Thieves. It was a payoff of a creative obsession that stretched back almost 20 years. Once Brooks was attached and the script was in place, the casting process began in one of the stranger ways Hollywood has on record. Brooks called Cary Elwes at home to offer him the lead role of Robin Hood, and Elwes immediately assumed he was being pranked. Convinced it was his friend Jim Carrey doing an impression, Elwes hung up. Brooks had to call back and insist it was really him before the conversation could even begin. Once Elwes signed on, his involvement went far beyond just acting. Brooks invited him into the casting process itself, giving him a say in who would fill key roles. Together they auditioned performers, discussed chemistry, and shaped the ensemble that would bring the parody to life. Familiar faces like Dom DeLuise and Dick Van Patten joined the lineup alongside newer talent, and Patrick Stewart even appeared as King Richard. The result was a cast built partly on professional reputation and partly on genuine personal connection, a combination that gave the comedy a texture that felt earned rather than assembled by committee. The casting session that generated the most electricity, though, involved a 19-year-old with virtually no film experience. Long before becoming one of the most recognizable names in comedy, Dave Chappelle walked into an audition for the role of Achu, Robin Hood's fast-talking sidekick. And according to those present, the room knew instantly. Elwes, who helped oversee the process, later recalled that they had seen many actors, but when Chappelle came in, something clicked immediately. His comedic timing was natural, his delivery sharp, and his confidence was remarkable for someone without a real film credit to his name. The role became his official big-screen debut, and the impact was undeniable from day one. The breakout was significant enough that Time magazine reportedly replaced a standard review of the film with a profile on its young newcomer instead. Chappelle went on to appear in The Nutty Professor, Con Air, and Half-Baked before eventually creating one of the most iconic sketch shows in television history. But all started in a parody about a man in tights, playing a character named after a sneeze. Production officially began on January 5, 1993, in Los Angeles, and wrapped by late March, giving the crew fewer than 3 months to complete principal photography before the film's planned summer release. That timeline is tight for any production, but especially for one filled with choreographed fight scenes, musical numbers, and elaborate period costumes. The compressed schedule shaped more than just logistics. It influenced the feel of the finished product. The sketch-style pacing, the quick setups, and the gags that hit fast and move on all carried the fingerprints of production that did not have time to overthink anything. Mel Brooks, a veteran of working under pressure from his years in live television with Sid Caesar, thrived in environments where speed forced decisions rather than endless deliberation. By late July 1993, the film was in theaters just over 6 months from the first day of shooting, a turnaround that included editing, scoring, marketing, and final sound mixing. The tight window meant there was almost no room for reshoots or major revisions, and the movie carries that energy throughout. Loose, fast, and unapologetically spontaneous in ways that more polished productions rarely allow themselves to be. Sherwood Forest, as it turned out, was located about 35 miles north of Los Angeles. The outdoor scenes depicting the forest, the spring fair, and the castle were all filmed at Sable Ranch in Santa Clarita, a sprawling property in the Santa Monica Mountains that had served Hollywood productions for decades. Interior scenes were shot at Warner Hollywood Studios in West Hollywood, a location that carried its own piece of Robin Hood history. The same studio lot had been used to film Douglas Fairbanks' Robin Hood back in 1922, making the parody a direct geographical descendant of one of the legend's earliest and most iconic screen versions. That continuity was not planned for symbolic effect. It was simply where the available sound stages were. But a more remarkable geographical connection came through Lake Sherwood, located nearby in the Santa Monica Mountains. The lake had originally been called Lake Canterbury before being renamed in 1921 after Fairbanks filmed Robin Hood scenes on its shores. The Errol Flynn adaptation in 1938 later used the same lake. By the time Brooks arrived in 1993, the location had been part of Robin Hood filmmaking for over 70 years, a body of water literally named after the fiction it had helped create. The parody became part of the tradition. It was spoofing, connected to a 1921 silent adventure through the same California landscape. Despite the quick pace and the comedic tone, Brooks insisted that the action sequences carry genuine physical weight. His reasoning was straightforward. Parody works best when the thing being spoofed is executed convincingly. If Robin Hood's name was going on the marquee, the audience was owed horses and sword fighting. That philosophy drove the cast into weekend rehearsals that ran through Saturdays and Sundays for the entire duration of the shoot. Overseeing the training was fencing coordinator Victor Paul, a veteran stunt professional who had worked on major action films, including Die Hard. Paul found Elwes a particularly fast study, thanks to the extensive sword training the actor had already undergone for The Princess Bride. The foundational skills were already in place. The other cast members required more work, but the commitment was universal. The result is a film where the climactic duel between Robin and the Sheriff of Rottingham feels genuinely exciting even as the jokes keep coming. Elwes even landed a real bullseye during the archery scenes despite Brooks giving him only 3 takes to nail it. The training was serious, the pressure was real, and the physicality on screen reflects all of it. Near the end of production, things took a turn that only the most committed film set could have navigated without missing a beat. Richard Lewis, who played the neurotic Prince John, was almost finished with his scenes when he was suddenly hospitalized with hepatitis A. His fever reportedly spiked to 106 degrees, leaving him completely bedridden with just 2 lines left to deliver. Brooks's response was entirely in character. He called Lewis's hospital room with a plan to lay him on a stretcher, drive him to the set, prop him up against some wood, let him deliver his 2 remaining lines, and rush him straight back to the hospital within 20 minutes. It was the kind of scheme that sounds like it belongs in one of Brooks's own movies. Lewis recounted the story years later with obvious affection for the absurdity of it all. Whether the plan was ever seriously attempted or remained a running joke between director and actor, the anecdote captures something essential about how the production operated. Deadlines did not pause for emergencies, and Brooks handled stress the same way he handled everything else. The film's visual tricks were just as resourceful as its comic instincts. When Robin Hood swims back to England, the audience sees the famous white cliffs of Dover rising dramatically above the shoreline. None of it was real. The entire shot was created using a foreground miniature, a classic filmmaking technique that places a small-scale model close to the camera to blend seamlessly with the live-action background. The actual filming location was Paradise Cove in Malibu, with a small hand-painted England sign perched on top of the fake cliff to complete the gag. The man responsible for setting up the shot was production manager Robert Lon Brown, who had previously worked on Return of the Jedi, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Spaceballs. The miniature shot is a perfect example of how a low-cost practical effect could deliver both a visual joke and a convincing image at exactly the same moment. For viewers who don't notice the trick, it simply looks like a wide shot of the English coast. For those who catch the miniature or the hand-painted sign, it becomes another layer of comedy built directly into the filmmaking itself. The gag costs almost nothing compared to digital effects, lasts only a few seconds, and captures the resourceful handmade spirit that runs through the entire production. One of the film's most memorable moments came from a place no one could have planned. When the Sheriff of Rottingham crashes through the roof and lands in Latrine's room, Tracy Ullman's character delivers an improvised remark that Mel Brooks found so genuinely funny, he kept it in the finished movie without hesitation. Ullman had built a reputation for exactly this kind of fearless spontaneity, and Brooks had given her room to experiment throughout the production. She took full advantage of it. Her approach to Latrine went beyond reading the script. She inhabited the character with a physical intensity and comedic boldness that elevated every scene she appeared in. The entire sequence involving the sheriff crashing into her room was reportedly improvised almost entirely by Roger Rees and Ullman together, with Brooks simply watching and deciding what worked. This willingness to let actors play, and to recognize when unscripted moments were better than written ones, gave the comedy a looseness that rigid productions rarely achieve. Running quietly through every scene featuring Richard Lewis is one of the film's most debated visual gags. Prince John has a mole that changes position from scene to scene, migrating from his left cheek to his chin to his lip to his right cheek, and eventually landing in the middle of his forehead. The gag is a direct callback to the shifting hump on Igor's back in Young Frankenstein, recycled here with the same deadpan commitment that made the original work. Critics were split on whether this constituted clever homage or creative laziness, with some praising it as one of the film's subtler running jokes, and others arguing that Brooks was leaning too heavily on his own back catalog. The gag also served as a gentle spoof of Alan Rickman's visible mole in Prince of Thieves, adding another layer of parody on top of the self-reference. What's undeniable is that a tiny piece of makeup became one of the most discussed visual details in the entire movie, which is a remarkable achievement for something most viewers only consciously register on a second or third viewing. Behind one of the film's smallest on-screen moments lies a story of unexpected personal generosity. A then-unknown actress named Chase Masterson had been cast in a speaking role as Prince John's companion, built around a joke referencing a popular television show of the era. She built a rapport with Brooks during auditions and was genuinely excited to join the production. When editing began, Brooks realized the joke might not age well and cut her scene entirely. Rather than letting her role simply disappear, he made a decision that Masterson has described as heartwarming ever since. He kept her visible in the background for just long enough to qualify for an on-screen credit and residual payments, and when he broke the news at a restaurant reception, he framed it with characteristic humor, telling her there was good news and bad news. The scene was gone, but it left her in just enough to keep getting paid. Those residuals, according to Masterson, have continued arriving ever since, making them her favorite recurring checks in the industry, in an industry where deleted scenes typically mean deleted paychecks. The gesture stands out as a rare moment of personal kindness from a director who understood that behind every small role is a real person depending on the work. Musical numbers have been a Mel Brooks signature since the very beginning of his career, and this film carried that tradition forward with a carefully blended mix of original compositions and borrowed material. Brooks personally wrote the lyrics for the title song, the ballad sung by Maid Marian in both versions of the Sherwood Forest rap. Composer Hummy Man provided the melodies, crafting an orchestral score that drew favorable comparisons to the swashbuckling scores of Hollywood's golden age. Not everything was built from scratch, though. The romantic ballad Robin serenades Marian with a lush Dean Martin-style number was actually written in 1937 and dropped into a medieval parody, without any irony, which is precisely what makes the moment work. The melody of the title song also borrowed from an earlier Brooks composition used in History of the World Part 1, recycled here with slight modifications. The actors didn't even perform their own vocals. Professional singers dubbed the musical sequences throughout, with the result being a soundtrack that sounds grand and polished while serving a movie that is anything but serious. That contradiction captures exactly how Brooks approached comedy throughout his entire career. Despite what some people assume, the film was not a commercial failure by any reasonable measure. Made on a budget of $20 million, it debuted at number 6 at the box office and earned $35.7 million in the United States and Canada alone, with international earnings pushing the worldwide total to approximately $72 million. But the real story happened after theaters closed. Brooks himself has said this film and Spaceballs are his 2 best-selling titles on home video, and that distinction tells you everything about how the movie found its true audience. VHS rentals, cable broadcasts, and later DVD releases kept introducing new viewers year after year, and each new generation discovered the jokes completely fresh. What transformed a modest theatrical performer into a beloved cult comedy was not spectacle, but longevity. The film did not need a massive opening weekend to prove itself. It needed time, and time delivered. When the reviews came in during the summer of 1993, there was no consensus whatsoever. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune awarded it half a star out of 4 and called it deeply disappointing. Rita Kempley of the Washington Post was equally harsh, describing it as a pointless lampoon from a filmmaker whose instincts were fading. On the other side, some critics acknowledged what worked and recognized that the funniest moments showed Brooks had not entirely lost his sharp, irreverent edge. Rotten Tomatoes now shows a 42% approval rating from critics, numbers that reflect genuine split opinion rather than unanimous dismissal. What critics could not predict was how differently parody ages compared to other genres. Jokes that felt recycled in 1993 became nostalgic touchstones by the 2000s. References that seemed dated to reviewers felt charmingly retro to younger audiences discovering the film on cable or DVD. Russell Crowe himself, star of yet another Robin Hood adaptation, called it the most entertaining version of the character's story as recently as 2016. Time did not just soften the critical reception, it essentially rewrote it. Buried inside the film's home video history is a commentary track that has quietly survived across 3 decades and 3 format changes. Originally recorded for the 1994 Laserdisc release, the Mel Brooks audio commentary was later carried over to DVD and then Blu-ray, becoming one of the longest-traveling bonus features in home media history. The same recording, unchanged, passed from one format to the next like an artifact nobody wanted to retire. The commentary itself is more conversational than technical, with Brooks occasionally setting up punchlines before they arrive and describing what is happening on screen as though the viewer cannot see it. Reviewers have noted that it is not his most informative work, but it carries a warmth and looseness that feels like sitting next to the director while he watches his own movie and cannot help talking through it. In an era when streaming platforms routinely strip bonus features from their catalogs, having a commentary that survived from Laserdisc through DVD to Blu-ray is increasingly rare. It is a direct line to the filmmaker's voice, recorded close to the time of release, and it provides a snapshot of how Brooks felt about the movie before decades of cult appreciation reshaped its reputation entirely. Listed quietly in the opening credits alongside Brooks' films is the name Gaumont, one of the oldest and most established film companies in France. Their involvement as a co-financing and international distribution partner helped stabilize the budget and guaranteed the movie would reach audiences across Europe before a single frame was shot. International co-financing was especially important for a parody of an American blockbuster, which did not automatically guarantee overseas interest. Gaumont had previously worked with Brooks on Spaceballs, so the partnership was already tested and trusted. For viewers, none of this changes a single frame of the movie, but the presence of French backing reveals something important about the economics of comedy filmmaking in the early 90s. Studios were increasingly cautious about funding parodies, and having an international partner absorb part of the risk made projects like this viable. Without Gaumont's involvement, the film might have faced a smaller budget or a much more difficult road to production entirely. Before the film reached theaters, HBO aired a promotional special titled Robin Hood, Men in Tights. The legend had it coming, hosted by Cary Elwes and running just over 26 minutes. It was designed as standard marketing material, a behind-the-scenes preview meant to build excitement for the upcoming release. What nobody anticipated was that this throwaway promotional segment would become one of the most valuable pieces of production history attached to the film. Elwes guides a viewer through the set, speaks with cast members during filming, and captures a version of production in motion that no retrospective interview could ever replicate. The footage shows actors between takes, crew members preparing setups, and Brooks directing in real time. The kind of raw on-location material that becomes increasingly precious as years pass. The special was later included as a bonus feature on both the DVD and Blu-ray releases, and it stands as a reminder that promotional content, when preserved, can accidentally become the most authentic record of production, capturing the energy of a set that exists only as long as the cameras are running. One of the most remarkable running gags in the film revolves around a prop that most audiences take for granted as a simple costume piece. Maid Marian's Everlast chastity belt, a steel contraption branded like boxing equipment, complete with sturdy lock, needed to function on multiple levels simultaneously. It had to look convincingly metallic on camera, be comfortable enough for Amy Yasbeck to wear across weeks of filming, and produce the right sound effects whenever characters interacted with it. The prop team designed it to appear rigid and imposing in close-ups, while remaining flexible enough for Yasbeck to move, sit, and perform physical comedy without restriction. The Everlast branding stamped onto the prop turned a medieval concept into a modern product joke, selling the anachronism in a single glance. Every scene involving the belt required coordination between wardrobe, props, and sound departments to make the gag land consistently. That kind of layered functionality does not happen by accident. It happens because a prop department understood that in a Mel Brooks comedy, every physical object on screen needs to work as hard as the actors wearing it. During the archery tournament, one of the film's centerpiece sequences, something happens that no traditional Robin Hood adaptation would ever attempt. After Robin loses a contest when his opponent splits his arrow in two, he stops the entire scene, reaches under his chair, pulls out a physical copy of the screenplay, and begins flipping to the pages to check whether the outcome is correct. He discovers that according to the script, he is supposed to get another shot. The joke escalates when Prince John and Sheriff of Rottingham produce their own copies of the same script and reluctantly confirm that Robin is right. The entire scene pauses, not for a dramatic beat, but for the characters to consult their own movie's written instructions. It is a fourth wall break, so complete that it does not just acknowledge the audience. It acknowledges the screenplay as a tangible object existing within the world of the film itself. The characters are not just aware they are in a movie. They are reading ahead to see what happens next. This arrived years before self-referential humor became a mainstream comedy staple, predating the wave of meta-comedies that would come to dominate the 2000s and beyond. Brooks did not invent the technique, but he executed it with such commitment and internal logic that it became one of the most referenced examples in comedy history. Over the decades since its release, the film has crossed a threshold that most comedies never reach. It became something audiences do not just watch, but actively recreate. School drama departments have staged unauthorized adaptations. Halloween groups have coordinated full merriment costumes, complete with choreographed dance routines. Convention floors regularly feature fans dressed as Rabbi Tuckman, Blinken, or Achu, quoting dialogue with the accuracy of people who have watched the movie dozens of times. The songs are a major reason this happened. The title number, with its catchy melody, easy-to-learn lyrics, and built-in choreography, gave fans a performance piece they could replicate without professional training. Unlike most movie musical numbers, it was designed to look like amateurs performing, which made amateur recreation feel authentic rather than awkward. The costumes help too. Tights, tunics, and pointed hats are cheap to assemble and immediately recognizable, lowering the barrier between watching the film and embodying it. What keeps Robin Hood, Men in Tights alive after more than 30 years is not nostalgia alone. It is a gradual discovery that real craftsmanship was hiding behind every silly moment. Sword fights choreographed by a die-hard veteran. A prop belt engineered over weeks to function as costume, plot device, and product parody simultaneously. A miniature cliff built on a Malibu beach to fake the white cliffs of Dover. A screenplay born in a dentist's chair, fought over in arbitration, and eventually handed to the characters themselves to read on screen. Beneath the tights and the puns, there was a production that took its own absurdity completely seriously. That effort, invisible to most viewers on first watch, is precisely what separates a forgettable joke from one that people are still quoting more than 30 years later.